Welcome back to Deadly Truths. And again, this is Reno Murders, Death in the Biggest Little City. Today, we're going to cover Lake Tahoe. I'm sure you thought it was only a matter of time, especially for the Reno locals. So, Lake Tahoe, summer of 1977, a year when the casinos at State Line were booming. The tourists were pouring in. It was the kind of place where people came chasing a dream, a job, or just the freedom of the mountains. The lake basin in the 1970s was a really interesting crossroads. Booming tourist resorts, half small mountain town with a darker undercurrent. Casinos like Sierra Tahoe, later called the Horizon, now called the Hard Rock, drew gamblers, entertainers, and workers. And actually, I think the Hard Rock may have even changed hands again in the last 1 or 2 years. Elvis Presley performed there multiple times in the early 1970s. Tourists from the Bay Area flocked up the mountain every weekend. Young people from all over the U.S., especially the Midwest, came looking for casino work. Restaurant jobs, ski resort jobs, or summer employment. Tahoe was seen as glamorous, a mix of Vegas flash and California mountain life. Subdivisions were growing fast in South Lake Tahoe. They needed houses for the casino and resort workforce. Real estate was booming, and that's how someone like Joseph Holt will fit in later. In the 1970s, Tahoe's scene was heavy on bars, nightclubs, and after-hour parties. Alcohol flowed freely, and marijuana and harder drugs were present. Many workers and visitors weren't locals. People came for a season or a year, which meant you had a lot of drifters, hitchhikers, and folks without deep ties, making vulnerable people easier to target. On the California side, South Lake Tahoe proper, it still felt like a tight-knit mountain town. Everyone knew each other at school, at church, or even at the grocery store. The hitchhiking culture was really common in Tahoe in the 1970s, and I had discussed this when I talked about the Sheep's Flat Jane Doe, who recently got her name back. She, too, was most likely hitchhiking. Workers without cars regularly hitched rides to casinos, bars, or home. If you go to Colorado, even still out here when you're in the Sierras, whenever you're around ski resorts, you see it in Montana and Wyoming, there's a lot of workers who still hitchhike. Of course, this creates major risks, especially for women. South Lake Tahoe PD was really small back then. El Dorado County sheriffs had limited resources, and forensic science, well, that was primitive. When bodies turned up, especially in the wooded areas, cases were hard to solve. The casinos were rumored to have mob ties at most Nevada casinos they did back then, and that added a backdrop of corruption and intimidation, even if most locals weren't directly touched by it. One of the people I want to talk about today is 27-year-old Brynn Rainey. Brynn wasn't a local. She had just moved from Ohio a few months earlier. She was looking for work and a change of pace, and she found both at the Sierra Tahoe Casino in State Line, Nevada. Brynn worked as a keno runner, weaving through the casino floor, collecting bets, bringing results back to players. She lived on Emerald Bay Road, and like a lot of young workers at the Tahoe Basin, she didn't have a car. She caught rides, took the bus, and sometimes she hitchhiked. Friends described her as independent, social, and finding her footing in a new town. On the night of July 24th, 1977, was scheduled to work the graveyard shift, 2 a.m. at the Sierra Tahoe. But before clocking in, she stopped at the Bitter Creek Saloon, just a short walk from the casino. The bartender remembered her that night. She ordered a drink. Nothing seemed off. Just another young woman on her way to work the all-night shift. But Brynn never made it. She vanished somewhere between the bar and the casino doors. Almost a month later, on August 20th, a horseback rider near State Line Stables noticed something strange in the dirt, what looked like a shallow grave. Buried there was the decomposed body of a young woman. Next to her, investigators found a purse with identification inside. It was Brynn Rainey. The coroner believed that she had been raped and strangled, but the advanced decomposition made it hard to pin down the exact cause of death. What they did know, this was a homicide. Someone had buried her there, just off the main strip where thousands of people gambled and partied every night. Detectives documented everything they could: the shallow grave, the state of the body, the personal items. Her clothing told a story: evidence of sexual assault, traces of blood. But 1977, forensics were limited. DNA testing didn't exist yet. What they had was circumstantial. No eyewitnesses, no suspects, no one saw her leave the bar or step into a car. Just a 27-year-old woman who never made it to her shift, and a body hidden in the dirt less than a mile from the casino. For a while, investigators pushed hard. They interviewed coworkers, bar staff, locals, anyone who might cross paths with Brynn that night. But nothing stuck. No one came forward. No one was arrested. Eventually, the file was boxed up and stored away. Brynn Rainey's case became just another Tahoe mystery, a young woman who came west for a new life, cut down before she had a chance to live it. Her story frozen in time as the investigation went cold. 2 years after the murder of Brynn Rainey, another woman's young life was cut short in the Tahoe Basin. This time, it wasn't a casino worker or a transplant from out of state. It was a local teenager, 16-year-old Carol Andersen, a smiling, fresh-faced teenager with straight, long blonde hair, reflecting that girl next door look for the era. Carol grew up in South Lake Tahoe, state line area. She was just 16 years old, a girl with her whole life ahead of her. Friends remembered her as fun, social, and like most teens in Tahoe of the time, she was a regular at all the parties. And the summer of 1979, Carol was balancing the edge between childhood and adulthood, still in high school, but stepping out into the independence of late nights with friends. On the night of June 30th, 1979, Carol went out to a party in State Line. It was the start of a summer, the kind of night that every teenager lives for. Music, friends, and small-town buzz of being young. But sometime after leaving that party, Carol disappeared. She didn't make it home. She didn't call anyone. She simply vanished into the night. By the next morning, the worst fears had come true. Carol's body was found off Pioneer Trail Road, not far from South Lake Tahoe. Carol's body was left out in the open. There was no attempt to hide her, no effort to cover the crime, just violence and abandonment. Carol had been bound, gagged, and strangled. Investigators determined that she had been killed where she was found, transported, not concealed. The brutality was plain to see. Her young age, her restraints, the location, it all pointed to a calculated act, not a random accident. But despite the clear signs of homicide, there were no witnesses. No one saw her leave that party with anyone. No one reported suspicious vehicles. Just a girl who left a party alive and was found dead on the roadside hours later. Detectives chased down every lead they could. Friends were questioned. Locals interviewed. Possible suspects were considered. But like so many cases in the 1970s, the forensic tools weren't there yet. The evidence they had couldn't give them a name. And as the days turned into weeks, the investigation stalled. Carol Andersen's murder became another cold case file, sealed away alongside Brynn Rainey's. 2 women, 2 years apart, both taken from the Tahoe Basin in acts of brutal violence, and no answers for decades. But in the early 2000s, everything began to change. Investigators had saved crucial evidence: Brynn's clothing, Carol's crime scene samples, evidence that carried the killer's DNA. And as forensic science advanced, the DNA was pulled back out of storage and re-examined. At first, the profiles went into CODIS, the national database. No hits. The trail still felt cold. Then came genetic genealogy, the same method that unmasked the Golden State Killer. By building up family trees from partial DNA matches, investigators finally began to see a pattern. Both Brynn and Carol's murders pointed to the same man. That man was Joseph Stephen Holt. Holt wasn't some stranger passing through. He lived in South Lake Tahoe since the mid-70s. He was a local real estate agent, the guy who sold homes in the same neighborhoods where young women disappeared. When investigators tested DNA from his family and even from his personal belongings, the match was undeniable. Holt's DNA was found on Brynn Rainey and Carol Andersen, but by the time his name surfaced, Holt was already dead. He had died of a heart attack in 2014, never facing a jury, never standing trial. It was because of the genetic genealogy that they were able to track down who he was at all. For the families of these two murdered women, the answer had finally come, but justice never followed. Photos of Holt show an ordinary man, a white male, medium build, light brown hair, sometimes clean-shaven, sometimes with a mustache. Nothing about him screams danger. He looked like somebody you'd trust to show you a house, not a killer burying bodies in shallow graves. And unlike a lot of the other murderers we have examined in this podcast, Holt had no criminal record. That put him on police radar. No arrest for violence, no trail of crimes that investigators could follow back. He was just another face in Tahoe, blending into the community. So for decades, he lived his life. Why we know for a fact he took two. And those two went unsolved. The files gathering dust, the families waiting for answers, as he continued to live until he had that heart attack in 2014. Do you guys know what I'm going to say? Yay, heart attacks. So according to the city of South Lake Tahoe's cold case list, Catherine Cohan is listed as a homicide found September 3rd in 1976 under the Truckee River Bridge. She was 17 years old at the time of her death, and she was described in the press as a high school student in the Tahoe area. Her case still remains unsolved to this day. I do think it's important to take another look at this case now that we know that he had been living there for all of those years, but for only the sake of DNA has been connected to two murders. I find it really hard to believe that he has not taken other lives. Kathleen had moved to Tahoe in June of 1976, just a few months before her death. She had come there with hopes of a fresh start and a soon-to-be marriage. She was finishing her senior year. Her fiancé was named Mike Warren, and he was living there. And that's why she had moved to the Tahoe area. On the evening of September 2nd, they had dinner at Caro's restaurant, where Warren worked as a dishwasher. After dinner, Kathleen told Warren she was going to walk to a place referred to as the Y to pass some time. They agreed to meet back at the restaurant when his shift ended at 10 p.m. She never returned. Warren waited, then went home, and later called the police when Kathleen was missing. Approximately 12 hours later, a young boy walking near the Upper Truckee River Bridge came across her body. She was found face down in shallow water under the bridge. Her dark hair was matted with blood from a massive skull fracture. Investigators determined she had been struck several times in the back of the head with a heavy blunt instrument. She had tried to crawl up the bank before losing consciousness. The scene suggests some struggle or effort in her final moments. She was found fully clothed, and her purse was laying in the water next to her. Her identification and personal items were not missing, which did suggest her death was not a robbery or a random theft. From local reporting, like the Tahoe Daily Tribune, the lead detective noted that the case files for her are extensive, several binders, many investigative reports, yet no motive, weapon, or strong physical evidence ever led to an arrest. There was no DNA evidence on her body to match to anyone. The burden of decomposition, water exposure, and time elapsed. These degrade or destroy evidence. So, lack of credible witnesses who saw her leave or saw suspicious behavior near the bridge, and add that to no known public links to other murders or recognized perpetrators, and that went on for decades. Because the case sits on the cold case list, it is revisited periodically when new leads come up. But as of the latest public sources, it remains unsolved. There are reasons for speculation. Holt, after all, had moved south Lake Tahoe around 1974, and she was murdered in 1976. So he was definitely living in the area, and that matches the time frame for his other murders as well. The location is local. The Upper Truckee River Bridge is in the Tahoe area, same general region where Holt later committed both of his other murders. Although linking him to this case does bring up one big question. His MO, it's quite different. His other victims, there was sexual assault and strangulation, whereas with Kathleen, it was blunt force trauma to the head, multiple strikes, and the body left intact, fully clothed, and no sexual assault. However, it doesn't mean that something else could have happened, and obviously, no one was there to tell us the true story. Reports do note that Holt frequently traveled between Lake Tahoe and San Jose, California, because San Jose was where he was originally from. He, re- he maintained his ties to the Bay Area and was always making trips. That route, Tahoe to the Bay Area, would have taken him along Highway 50, I-80, and into Northern California cities, overlapping corridors where multiple unsolved cases exist. In 2019, when investigators announced that Holt's DNA did match Brynn Rainey and Carol Andersen's murders, they emphasized that he may have had other victims, but they didn't publicly name any. And that, sadly, will always leave us with a lot of unanswered questions. This has been Reno Murders. I'm Becca. Thank you for joining me again. If you liked it, like it. If you want to follow, follow, and share it.